The neon on air sign hummed softly, casting a warm red glow across the dim studio. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the room fill the space between callers. It was just after midnight, and for the past decade, this tiny booth had been my second home. I was Michael Langley, host of Echoes After Dark, the radio show for insomniacs, loners, and seekers of the strange. Our tagline said it all: when the world sleeps, we listen. Most nights it felt like I was the only one awake in the world, perched here like a lighthouse keeper, waiting for stories to wash up from the darkness. Tonight wasn't any different, or at least that's what I thought. All right, night owls, it's your favorite hour of confessions, curiosities, and chilling tales. If you've got something to share, call me. I'm all ears. The phone lines lit up immediately, little bursts of green against the muted glow of the control board. I smiled to myself. The weird and the restless never failed me. The first few calls were exactly what I expected. A woman swore her basement mirror was haunted. A trucker claimed to have seen strange lights hovering over Route 67. And a man wanted to rant about government mind control. Standard fare. I kept the conversations moving, playing the part of the amused skeptic when necessary, the curious listener when it suited me. But then, just after 12:30, the line went quiet for a moment. One of the indicators blinked faintly, as if reluctant to connect. Finally, it held steady. Caller, you're live on Echoes After Dark. What keeps you up at night? The voice on the other end was faint, brittle, as though it was slipping through a crack in time. I heard you'd be here tonight. Something about the tone of his voice felt disturbingly familiar. I glanced at the control board, checking the connection. Everything seemed fine, but the voice had a hollow quality, like an old vinyl record warped from age. Well, you heard right. What's on your mind? There was a long pause, then the voice returned, softer, almost sorrowful. Do you believe in warnings, Michael? My stomach tightened. For a moment, I forgot I was on the air. The question seemed to slice through the usual dance of host and caller, as if this wasn't a story, but something personal. I'm not sure. Why don't you tell me more? The line hissed with faint static, and for a moment I thought the caller had hung up. When he spoke, an instant chill went up my spine. I've been waiting a long time to talk to you. You don't remember me, but I remember you. I felt a flicker of recognition, though I couldn't place why. I'm sorry. Have we spoken before? You don't remember. It's been 20 years, but you will. I sat there frozen, my headphones pressing against my ears. Dead air hummed in the background, a sound I usually avoided at all costs. Now, it felt deafening. Well, folks, looks like we lost our mystery caller. If you're still listening, call back. I've got questions for you. I moved on to the next caller, a woman convinced her dog could sense ghosts. Normally, I'd have leaned into the theatrics, but my rhythm was off. That voice, it gnawed at me. By the time I went to break, the studio felt colder. The usual jingles played, psychic hotlines, all-night diners, and the same ad for a local haunted hayride I'd heard 100 times before. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the bitterness cutting through the strange weight in my chest. When I returned to the microphone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The clock read 1:03 a.m. Time felt distorted, slippery. I pushed forward, though I couldn't tell you much about the next half hour of the show. It all blurred together. my usual focus clouded by unease. Then Jenny, my producer, tapped on the glass of the control room. I could see her face, pale and uneasy, as she gestured for me to check my messages. I clicked into the inbox on my monitor. There was only one new message, time-stamped 12:34 a.m., just minutes after the unsettling call. The subject line read, "Do you remember me?" My hands hovered over the mouse, a knot tightening in my stomach. When I opened the email, the body was blank, save for a single attachment, an audio clip. With a sense of growing dread, I clicked play. The recording began with static, then the sound of my own voice, sharp and unpolished from years ago. "This is Michael on Echoes After Dark. What keeps you up at night?" There was a pause, and then the same voice answered, crackling and ghostly. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. The file's timestamp read October 12th, 2003, exactly 20 years ago. Suddenly, the memories began to surface. I had taken a call like that before. It was one of my first years on the air, back when I was still figuring out how to navigate the strange terrain of late-night radio. The caller had claimed to know me, had issued cryptic warnings about my future. I'd dismissed it at the time, chalked it up to a lonely crank looking for attention. But a week later, my car skidded off the road in a rainstorm. I'd survived with minor injuries, but the accident had haunted me for years. Now, as I stared at the timestamp on the recording, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The same voice 20 years apart, the same warning resurfacing like a ghost from my past. "Jenny, I need you to pull the logs for tonight's calls. I want to know where that guy called from." When Jenny returned, she looked shaken. "Michael, that line doesn't exist. It's not listed in the system. What do you mean?" It's like the call came from nowhere. Before I could respond, the phone rang again. I stared at the flashing light, my hand hovering over the receiver. Every instinct told me not to answer it, but I did. "This is Michael." The silence on the other end stretched, heavy and oppressive. And then the voice returned. "You can't outrun it, Michael. Not this time." The line went dead, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing. The eerie ring of that second call lingered in my ears long after the line went dead. The rest of the show passed in a blur. I went through the motions, my voice steady and professional, but my mind was stuck on that voice, the voice that knew me. By 3 a.m., Echoes After Dark was wrapping up for the night. I killed the mics, stood up and stretched, my body heavy with exhaustion. Jenny poked her head into the studio. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired." She wasn't convinced, but she didn't push. Jenny had been with me for years. She knew when to let things slide. "Good show. I'll finish up the logs, go home, get some sleep." I nodded, grabbing my coat and keys. As I stepped into the parking lot, the cold night air hit me like a slap. The lot was empty except for my car, the streetlights buzzing faintly overhead. Something didn't feel right. I scanned the shadows, the back of my neck prickling with unease. I'd never been one to scare easily, but tonight was different. That voice, those words. It was like they'd left a mark on me, something I couldn't shake. By the time I got home, the city was silent, the kind of quiet that only exists in the deepest hours of the night. My apartment felt colder than usual. The dim glow of the streetlights outside casting strange shapes on the walls. I locked the door behind me, double-checking the deadbolt. I didn't bother turning on the TV or pouring myself a drink, like I usually did. Instead, I went straight to my desk. The email. I had to hear it again. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the touchpad. The attachment was still there, a silent reminder of the night's bizarre events. My pulse quickened as I played the recording. This is Michael on Echoes After Dark. What keeps you up at night? The faint static, the pause, and then, you don't remember me, but I remember you. I paused the clip, my hand trembling. The voice was identical to the one I'd heard live tonight, down to the inflection. But how? How could a 20-year-old recording match perfectly with what I'd heard just hours ago? A knock at the door shattered my concentration. I froze. It was almost 4 a.m. Who would be knocking at this hour? The knock came again, louder this time. I stood slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Who is it? No answer. Another knock, this time rapid and insistent. I grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy metal flashlight, and crept toward the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. Hello? Silence. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my breath shallow. Finally, I unlatched the chain and cracked the door open. The hallway was empty. On the ground, just outside the threshold, was a small envelope. I looked up and down the hallway, but there was no sign of anyone. My neighbors' doors were closed, the building deathly quiet. I picked up the envelope, its weight unsettlingly light. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. When I saw the image, my stomach dropped. It was me. I was sitting in the studio, leaning into the mic, just as I had been tonight. But there was something wrong. In the background, barely visible in the shadows of the booth, was a figure. A man, or something like one. I shut the door quickly, bolting it behind me. My mind raced. The photo couldn't be real. Polaroids didn't just appear out of thin air. I examined the picture under the light. The figure in the shadows wasn't clear, but there was something about its shape, its posture. It wasn't standing naturally, it was slumped, twisted, like it didn't belong there. The knock came again. This time it wasn't at the door, it was at the window. I spun around, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The window was just a few feet away, the blinds drawn tightly shut. I stepped closer, holding the flashlight like a lifeline. Who's there? The knock came again, soft but deliberate. My hand trembled as I reached for the blinds. Slowly I pulled them back. There was nothing there, just the empty street, the faint glow of a street lamp, and the stillness of the early morning. But as I turned away, I saw it. On the glass, written in what looked like condensation, were 4 words. You can't escape it. By now, my body was running on pure adrenaline. Sleep was out of the question. I grabbed the Polaroid and the recording, stuffing them into my bag. I needed answers. Against my better judgment, I drove back to the station. The streets were deserted, the headlights cutting through the fog like knives. When I arrived, the building was dark, save for the faint glow of Jenny's desk lamp. She was still here, hunched over the control board, her face illuminated by the pale light of the monitors. Jenny. Michael, what are you doing here? I need your help. There's something going on. I don't know how to explain it, but I need you to look at something. I handed her the Polaroid. She studied it, her brow furrowing. Where did you get this? It was left at my door, after the show. Her eyes widened. Michael, this doesn't make sense. This figure, it looks like... The lights in the station flickered. We both froze. The hum of the equipment faltered, replaced by an eerie, high-pitched whine. Then the phone rang. Not the usual desk phone. The studio phone. The same one that had taken the calls earlier tonight. I turned to Jenny, her face pale and her eyes wide. Don't answer it. But I had to. I walked into the booth, the air thick with a strange electric charge. The phone continued to ring, loud and insistent. With trembling hands, I picked up the receiver. Hello? The voice on the other end was calm, almost amused. Did you think I wouldn't find you? The voice on the phone was my own. Do you believe in warnings, Michael? Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone. The silence so heavy it felt like the air had thickened around me. Beside me, Jenny was clutching the Polaroid tightly, her knuckles white. What did it say? It was me. My voice. Jenny's eyes widened, but before either of us could say more, the car engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lights flickered, then went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. Michael, what's happening? I tried the ignition, but the car wouldn't start. The cold silence outside pressed in, amplifying every sound, our breathing, the faint creak of the car's frame, the distant whistle of wind. And then from somewhere outside came a voice, a low, mournful sound like someone calling out from far away. Did you hear that? I nodded, my pulse racing. The voice was faint, almost human, but warped, like it was struggling to push through layers of static. Then it came again, louder this time. Michael. Jenny froze. What was that? It knows my name. The voice called again, closer now. And with it came a memory. One I'd buried so deep I thought it would never resurface. It was 20 years ago. A rainy highway, slick with oil and water, the sharp smell of whiskey on my breath. The old sedan with the rusted doors that I could barely afford. And the figure stumbling along the side of the road, thumb outstretched. I'd seen him too late. The car swerved. The thud of the impact was sickening, a sound I'd never been able to forget no matter how hard I tried. When I got out, the man was lying there motionless. His eyes stared blankly into the rain, empty of life. I panicked. I told myself it wasn't my fault. He shouldn't have been on the road. I was just a scared kid, barely 22, with my whole life ahead of me. I got back into the car and drove off, leaving the body behind. No one ever found out. Until now. The voice outside grew louder, clearer. It wasn't just calling my name, it was repeating something else. You left me. You left me. Jenny shook me, snapping me out of the memory. Michael, what is going on? Before I could answer, the windshield began to fog over again, just like before. This time words appeared, written as if by an unseen hand. He knows. I could barely breathe. Jenny followed my gaze, and when she saw the message, her grip on my arm tightened. Who knows? I couldn't bring myself to answer. The guilt was too heavy, too suffocating. Then the passenger side door creaked open, slow and deliberate. Jenny screamed as she was yanked from the car by an unseen force. Her scream cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of the door slamming shut. Jenny! I shouted, fumbling with my seatbelt. I threw the door open and stumbled out into the cold night. The lot was empty. No Jenny. No sound. Nothing but the faint whisper of the wind. Where are you? The voice answered, louder than ever, from somewhere behind me. You left me. I turned slowly, and there he was. The man from the road. He looked exactly as he had that night, soaked to the bone, his clothes tattered and mud-streaked. His head hung at an unnatural angle, his face pale and swollen, his eyes black pits of emptiness. You left me to die. I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me. I didn't mean to. You did. And you thought you could forget, thought you could live your life and leave me in the dark. Tears streamed down my face as I backed away, desperate to escape. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. You knew. You knew what you did and you did nothing. He loomed over me now, his face inches from mine. You ran, Michael, but you can't run anymore. The air around me grew heavy, suffocating. My vision blurred, and my chest tightened as if unseen hands were pressing down on me. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Sorry won't bring me back, Michael, but it will bring you to me. The last thing I saw was his hand reaching for me, impossibly cold, pulling me into the darkness. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the parking lot anymore. I was back in the radio studio. The neon glow of the on-air sign was as bright as ever, and the faint hum of the equipment filled the room. I was sitting at the mic, headphones on, just like always. But something was wrong. The call board was empty, and the clock on the wall was frozen at 12:34 a.m. I reached for the mic, my hands trembling. Hello? Static filled my headphones, followed by the faint sound of breathing. Then, a familiar voice answered. Welcome back, Michael. It was me. Somewhere in the dark, the sound of Jenny's voice echoed faintly, distant and pleading. Michael, where are you? But I couldn't answer, because I wasn't in the studio anymore. I wasn't anywhere. I was nowhere, and I wasn't alone. As the chilling echoes of Michael's fate fade into the shadows, we're left with a haunting question. What happens when the ghosts of our past refuse to rest? Perhaps Michael wasn't the only one with secrets buried deep. Perhaps we all have something waiting to claw its way back into the light. Thank you for joining us once again at the Sinister Chronicles, where the line between the living and the dead is only as thin as a whisper. But don't stray too far into the dark just yet. Next week, we'll unravel another ghastly tale that will leave your heart pounding and your mind racing. Until then, sleep lightly, as if you can. Good night, dear listeners. Until next time.